Some people are not held together by alignment. They're held together by proximity. Proximity to you. Not because they were whole, but because your coherence gave them shape. They weren't grounded, they were orbiting your field. Your field became the architecture they never built for themselves, and when you stood still, they mistook it for safety. You didn't teach them, you didn't command them, you simply held a rhythm they could not generate for themselves, and that rhythm kept their chaos quiet, not healed, just hidden. But then something shifted. You no longer distorted yourself to maintain harmony. You no longer adjusted your frequency to keep them close. You no longer softened truth to protect fragility. You did the most powerful thing a man can do. You withdrew your gravity. Not your love, not your wisdom, not your presence, your gravity. The invisible structure that made them feel stable even as they lived in distortion. You didn't confront, you didn't accuse, you didn't demand change. You simply stopped lending them coherence they had not yet earned. And that was enough to collapse everything they built in your orbit. This is not cruelty, it's not abandonment. This is what happens when the scaffolding of borrowed signal is removed. Their projections can no longer land. Their manipulations can no longer thread. Their image loses weight because it was your field that gave it shape. And now they're left facing what was always true, that they were never really grounded, only anchored through you. This is the part that no one tells you, that the greatest stabilizing force in someone else's life might be your silent coherence. Not your effort, not your advice, not your support, just your gravity. And when that's gone, everything they refused to process comes rushing in, not as punishment, as precision, because the structure they leaned on is no longer holding them upright. Now, the sovereign man does not collapse with others. He doesn't absorb their dissent. He doesn't catch distortion in the name of compassion. He simply recognizes when the field is being used as a substitute for their growth. And when he sees it, he steps back. No fanfare, no retaliation, just quiet withdrawal. And the moment he exits their field, so does their illusion of control. This is not a lesson for them. It is a remembering for you that coherence is precious, and when you lend it to those who are not aligned, you delay their reckoning and drain your own signal. There will be people who say you've changed, who will say that you've turned cold, that you disappeared without care. And that's because they only ever felt safe when they were orbiting your structure. They never learned to hold their own. And now you've stopped holding it for them, not because you hate them, but because you remember who you are. And that remembering is no longer available for rent. The man who withdraws his gravity does not become empty, he becomes clean. He does not leave collapse behind him, he leaves space. Space for others to confront their true architecture. Without your scaffolding, without your translation, without your coherence. And what they build next is finally their own if they choose to build something coherent. And you don't owe them your gravity, you don't owe them calibration, you don't owe them alignment that costs you your own. The sovereign man gives freely, but only when the structure is clean, and when it's not, he walks. Not because he's angry, but because he's no longer available for someone else's delay. When you withdraw your gravity, here are some things that happen. The triangulations collapse. The performances lose their stage. The distortions lose their reference point. The manipulations disintegrate. The emotional games end because the energy that fed the emotional games is no longer present. And this doesn't just affect them, it strengthens you Because every time you withdraw your coherence from distortion, you sharpen your signal. And every time you choose silence over rescue, you deepen your architecture. Here's what most never understand. Gravity is not dramatic. It doesn't rage, it doesn't declare, it doesn't slam doors. It simply leaves. And when it does, the field rearranges itself, suddenly, completely, irreversibly. If you're holding someone upright with your signal, without their consent, without their awareness, without their readiness, that's not service, that's interference. And the longer you maintain it, the more unstable they become, because they're not learning to ground for themselves. They're learning to rely. And eventually the very coherence you offer becomes their crutch and then their cage. So you exit quietly, completely, and lovingly. And what follows is not collapse, it's clarity. You are never the enemy, you are the equilibrium. And your exit was the invitation for them to finally build their own. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to warn them. You don't need to offer closure. You already gave them your gravity. Now you return it to yourself. And in that return, you become untouchable again, not because you've hidden, but because you become unshakable. That is the mark of gravity. It doesn't flinch, it doesn't beg, it doesn't punish. It simply holds what is real. And when what is real is no longer welcome, it leaves. Welcome to The Architect Speaks.